All right, welcome back again. This is Unit 5, God Chooses Israel. This is Lesson 23, and the key person of Moses. Before we get started, I will say one thing. If you notice, I said I was going to try to keep the videos between 3 to 5 minutes. Those first two lessons were a lot longer. These next three lessons will be a lot shorter, I promise. So, Lesson 23, key person Moses. Moses, of course, was the son of Amram and Jochebed. They were Levites who refused to obey Pharaoh's command to throw all the male children into the river. You remember how the Bible tells us that she saw that Moses was a beautiful baby, and so she refused to do what Pharaoh said. And so, because of that, she hides him in the bulrushes. And so, then Pharaoh's daughter finds him and raises him. And we said this is ironic because he's going to be the one who delivers Israel from Pharaoh's cruelty. Remember that he was aware of his Hebrew background. According to Hebrews 11, he chose to be a Hebrew rather than Egyptian. And sometimes I think we take for granted what that means. He could have had anything that he wanted. He could have had fame, wealth, power. He wasn't a true Egyptian, so he couldn't have been king, but he could have been very high in that government. But the Bible tells us that he chose to suffer affliction because he didn't care about those things. He cared more about the spiritual life. So when he was about 40, he saw an Egyptian taskmaster beating a Hebrew slave. You remember he rises up, he kills the taskmaster, buries the body, and the next day there are two Hebrews who are fighting. And of course, one of them says, "Are you going to kill me like you did the Egyptians?" So he realizes that what he had done is found out. Pharaoh wants to kill him. So Pharaoh wants him dead, and so Moses goes and he flees to Midian. While in Midian, he meets Jethro or Reuel, it's the same person. He marries his daughter Zipporah. For 40 years, he lives as a shepherd. He's tending Jethro's flocks. And then after that 40 years, when he's about 80 years old, God calls Moses to lead Israel out of Egypt. Of course, you remember that what he's probably most famous for, at least in the beginning of this, is his reluctance. He didn't want to do it, and he kept trying to come up with excuse after excuse after excuse. Who am I going to say sent me? I'm not good at speaking. Finally, his last excuse, you remember that he just says, "Can you send somebody else?" And that's the one that God gets mad at. But I think that for as much as we look at Moses and say, "How could he do that?" I think that in reality, we would all act that same way. We're not good for this job. There's got to be someone else that's better for this. But God chooses Moses to do this, and so finally, he has to go. He leads the people out. And one of the things about Moses that we remember very well is his intercession. He would he would stand in the stopgap between God and the people. Several times he had to do this because of Israel's disobedience. Several times he told God, "Look, you know, kill, lay the iniquity on me, not on the people." And of course, God said, "No, I'm not going to do that. The people are going to have to pay their price for what they've done." But we see that interceder role that Moses did several times throughout his life. The Bible calls him a friend of God. The Bible tells us that God spoke to Moses like a friend talking to somebody else. There was a very close relationship there that most people didn't have. In fact, I'd say a lot of people didn't have. And so he was called a friend of God. But you remember, he wasn't perfect. As good as Moses was, there were things in his life that he did wrong. And of course, the big one was at Kadesh Barnea. This is when God told him to speak to the rock. He strikes it instead. And so God tells him, because of that disobedience, he will not get to enter into the promised land. Moses is such a key character throughout this study. Throughout Exodus, of course, Moses wrote the first 5 books of the Bible. And so Moses is called the lawgiver. And the biggest thing about Moses, remember, he says that God will raise up a prophet like him. And of course, that is a clear prophecy about the coming of Jesus. So as we think about Moses, Moses is a very important character that we see in the Bible. And so once again, don't forget your bonus words. And so since this is the third lesson, let's see, the bonus word is going to be Naomi. We will talk about Naomi in our next lesson, but your bonus word is Naomi.